Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me? Cool. All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I am not going to lead you anywhere. Otherwise, I will do to you like what happened 3,000 years ago. You will get lost in the desert. So tonight, or you guys need to know a bit about me. What I'm going to tell you about me. I'm Mohammed Alatar. I'm a Palestinian filmmaker and researcher. I reside now in Ramallah, but most of my life was between the US and in Europe and here. And right now I'm working on a project for about the late King Hussein of Jordan. And specifically about King Hussein of Jordan and his effort to make peace with Israel. We will begin, Yahudit will show you a clip of 7 minutes from the upcoming film. And after that, we will, I will talk more. So now I will give it to Yahudit so she can show you the clip and we'll go from there.
Okay, here we go. Do you have sound?
An incident that I'll always remember in my life was to occur and a great loss for me. Departed to the mosque, I remember. I was just about 3 paces behind him when we entered through the gate. And suddenly I saw someone rush from behind with a revolver in his hand. And before anyone could do anything, he fired a shot. My grandfather was hit and fell. We carried him out, but unfortunately he had lost his life.
How old were you when that happened?
About 15 and a half.
I'd like to move on to your first meeting with Israeli officials in September 1963.
The Arabs are prepared to negotiate with us? Which Arab? Where? When?
And I believe that the first one was with Yaakov Herzog. What was the background to this meeting and what was the purpose?
As a person in a position of responsibility next door to Israel, there was no way that I could live with myself just sitting idly, not knowing what I'm dealing with. But I had to explore. I had to try to find out what is thinking of others. There's no future.
In November 1966, Israel carried out the raid against Samoa. Did you feel betrayed by Israel?
Yes, I did. In fact, that happened on my birthday, and it was not a very pleasant birthday present. And when Nasser moved across the canal, I knew that war was inevitable. I knew that we were going to lose. Jordan was placed in a position of the conspirator, of the betrayer. And this was the Egyptian propaganda machine.
الجيش المصري جيش عربي، جيش مقاتل، جيش مناصر. كل واحد فيهم جزمته أشرف من تاج الملك سعود والملك حسين.
Particularly over the Palestinian issue. It was always the key. It was devastating way, in a very sad way, a very ugly way.
There was a meeting in May 1968 in London.
I think there was one almost immediately after 67 as well. What was said then didn't give me very much encouragement.
He cannot expect and must not expect that everything goes back exactly where it was before he entered the war and attacked Jerusalem again, as his grandfather did in 48.
The second meeting apparently was with Golda Meir. What was your impression?
I was trying to resolve it from a Jordanian-Palestinian perspective. Palestinians wanted to have their own identity. And to my way of thinking at that time, the idea of a federation was totally opposed to this idea.
There is a Palestinian state in Jordan.
We will not return to the 67 line.
Mr. Hussein doesn't have any rights here. It is the land of Israel.
If Jordan wants peace, direct negotiations.
Why on earth should the Arabs negotiate with you on those terms? Why not? What are they going to get? What size Israel? Must we live with? Or must we recognize?
I was ready to give them considerable parts, not all.
If you know of an Arab leader, head of state that wants to negotiate with us, by all means, tell us.
The question might be asked in reverse.
From 1974 until 1976, you had about 6 meetings with Israeli leaders. Can you cast your mind back to that period?
I was offered the return of something like 90% of the territory, excluding the Jerusalem. I couldn't accept that because I could not give an inch of Palestinian territory or Palestinian rights.
First one to establish an Arab kingdom in Jerusalem. We shall not do that.
Territory or peace. She cannot have both.
No, the Arabs are inferior. I wouldn't like to say that, but I think as fighting goes, they are.
You consider you're on a superior moral basis to the Arabs?
I think yes.
The future, it is bleak, extremely bleak, for all of us.
Did you feel let down by Israel for not giving you anything that you could put forward in front of the Arab world?
Thank you. We will now start the live stream of Facebook. And I will reintroduce you one more time for our recordings. Welcome, Mohammed Alatar, filmmaker, activist. It's so nice to have you with us. It's a true honor. Please, the stage is yours. And when Mr. Alatar is finished, we will take questions via chat. And let's go.
Thank you, Yahudit. Can you hear me? Good. Thank you, and ahlan wa sahlan, as we say here in Ramallah. My talk tonight, it wouldn't be like an academic talk. It's a more of a filmmaker notes. I have accumulated a huge research from this project. I think exceed like 6,000 pages. So I will try I will begin first, how did I came to this project. I have a friend an Israeli friend who's living in the UK. He's a very well-known writer and professor, Avi Shlaim. I'm sure some of you will know who he is. So I was visiting Oxford, and he gave me one of his book. It was his latest book, and it's called The Lion of Jordan, about King Hussein of Jordan. So I start reading that book, and my way from Oxford to the airport in London. And by the time, I think I was flying to Jordan, yes. And by the time I get Jordan, I was done with 700 pages of that book. I was just eating it. And I remember I wrote in the back of it, "This is for a film." In the 70s, the great legendary foreign minister and foreign ambassador of Israel to the UN, Abba Eban, coined the term, "The Arab never missed a chance to miss a chance." And of course, Eban was talking about the Arab attitude toward making peace with Israel. I think King Hussein's journey to make peace with Israel will flip that slogan on its head, and it showed beyond reasonable doubt that there were no chance for the Arab to be missed. I've been researching this story for 2 years, and I am desperate to find one single piece of proposal Israel ever submitted to the Arab. There is none. Not a single peace proposal Israel ever put forward to the Arab. King Hussein's journey started in the 60s. Exactly in 1963, King Hussein was visiting London to see his Jewish doctor, Dr. Manuel Halpert. He was his physician. And the Israeli approached the doctor and asked him if he can approach Hussein and arrange a meeting with him. So the doctor did, and Hussein accepted. He said, "Okay, I'll meet with them." And that was 1963. And the first meeting took place on September 24th, 1963 in London at the clinic of Dr. Halpert. The first few meetings were more like both sides trying to kind of feel each other and see where they stand. And it took that from 63 to basically 65, 2 years, until they really start talking seriously. And Israel sent to that meeting a gentleman by the name of Yaqub Herzog. Yaqub Herzog was the general director of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a brilliant man, ordained rabbi, and he is the son of the chief rabbi of Northern Ireland. Yaqub Herzog kept the diaries. Every time he would meet with Hussein, he will go home and write his impression. His diaries, there is nothing, no secrets in it, but a lot of juicy details. He will describe the king mood and what he think the king thinking. And he always have a question about, what if I say that to him? What would he respond? So it's not really a file where you will find secrets, but it's a file to find little human details about two people been meeting with each other in secret for many years. All this lasted until 1966. 1966, as you all know, the West Bank was still under the control of Jordan. And there was an incident on the border between the West Bank and Israel, and the Israeli just went in and attacked a village it's called Samua. It's in the Hebron district. They killed 14 Jordanian soldiers, and they wounded about 20 of the village residents. And the Jordanian Air Force was trying to interfere, and the Israeli shot one of the airplane, and that was King Hussein's best friend. And it happened on King Hussein's birthday. So the Samua incident really shook Hussein to the core, because Hussein was meeting with the Israeli 4 days before. Just 4 days before that incident, he was meeting with the Israelis. And the Israeli assured him that everything is fine, because there was a lot of talk between them, the Palestinian, the Fidaiyin, the PLO, was sometimes launching some operation from the West Bank or from Jordan itself into Israel proper. So every time there was a little incident, I think at that time they blow up a mine and it killed 2 Israeli farmers. But every time that happened, Israel made sure that the Jordanian will pay really heavy price for it. After that incident and what happened, Hussein was really furious with Israel. He couldn't believe that they did that to him. I was just talking to you and meeting with you in secret just 4 days ago. And Hussein was taking really, really huge risk by meeting with the Israeli. The Arab world at that time was under the command of Nasser. And Nasser, of course, at that time doesn't want anything to do with the Zionists or with Hussein. So if Nasser would have found out about these meetings, probably Hussein's life will be in jeopardy. Although later on, the news of Hussein meeting with the Israeli was known for the leaders, and it was a 12 assassination attempt on his life and Hussein's life, because he was meeting with the Israelis. The 67 war happened. Hussein doesn't really want to be part of the war, but Hussein has no option. 66% of his kingdom is Palestinian refugees. And he calculated his option. If I stay out of the war, his own population will throw him out. If I join Nasser, we will lose the war. At the end, he picked what he thought was the least evil, and he decided to join Nasser in the war. And we all know what was the result of that war. After the war, at that time, Mr. Eshkol was the Prime Minister of Israel. And Mr. Eshkol said, now the war is over. I really fear the day we're going to sit down on the table and negotiate. And his fear was understood, because that means they have to put something forward. They have to give him some compromise. They have to have a position. And Israel at that time doesn't really have any position and put him forward any peaceful resolution to the conflict. The whole peace effort took a drastic turn in 77. In 77, Mr. Begin became the prime minister, and his first act was to go and build a huge settlement in the middle of the West Bank. Before that, the settlement was still on the perimeter of the West Bank. This time, this settlement is in the heart of Nablus. So in my own personal opinion, I think the two-state solution was dead at that time in 77. When Begin reached power, the two-state solution was over. The colonization of the West Bank was at full speed, and it was no way of going back. A few months after the war, the Arab get together in a summit in Cairo. It's called the Khartoum Summit. In that Khartoum Summit, Nasser came to the meeting really beat up. He just lost the war. And it's not Nasser himself. After a huge debate among the Arab, the world knows this summit by the 3 no's, if you remember. You know, the summit come up with 3 no's. No recognition of Israel, no peace with Israel, and no negotiation with Israel. That was the public front. What was happening in the meeting is a completely different story. The discussion was heated. Some of the Arab leaders attacked Nasser. King Hussein was trying to defend Nasser. And at the end, I will read you this quote is from Nasser himself. We must move quickly and exert our utmost effort to regain Jerusalem and the West Bank through the means available to us at the present time. I believe King Hussein should approach the American and agree with them and the restoration of the West Bank. I am ready to announce this publicly. That's Nasser in 1967. So King Hussein left from there, from Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, and he was on his way to America. At that time was Lyndon Johnson, the president. He met with Lyndon Johnson and he told him, and Johnson told him, are you sure Nasser on the same page? He said, yes, I just came from there. So Johnson wants to hear it from Nasser himself. So Hussein flew back to Cairo and they talked to Johnson and Johnson got the okay. And the Americans start working on what later become the 242 resolution, the UN resolution 242. After the American told Hussein that the minute this resolution will come out, you guys will recognize it and Israel will recognize it, and which basically means 2-state solution, land for peace. Israel will withdraw from the West Bank, the Arab will sign a peace agreement, and we will end the conflict. So Hussein left Washington feeling fantastic that finally there is something might work. And on his way back, he met in Paris with Golda Meir. And Golda Meir delivered the news to him, no, we're not going anywhere. We're not leaving the West Bank. We recognize the 242 resolution, but she started arguing over the interpretation of the text of the resolution. In English, the text of the resolution say Israel should withdraw from territory. In French, it said Israel should withdraw from all territory. So Golda Meir was arguing that the resolution does not imply that Israel will have to leave the whole of the West Bank. Hussein went back to the American, and the American told him, let's wait and see, and we're working to convince the Israeli to see if we can move the Israeli position forward. It took the American a few years to move them forward, and it didn't happen. But Hussein kept meeting with them. And there was lots of cooperation. There was security cooperation between Jordan and Israel. Hussein kept, you might ask, like, after all this, why would Hussein keep talking to them? Hussein kept talking to them because he was a trap. He was completely in a trap. His kingdom is living under aid from the American, and to get the American aid, you have to be a good boy with the Israelis. Basically, the Israelis give the green light for Jordan to get aid from the American. If you want to know how trapped Hussein was at that time, in 1981, the Prime Minister of Israel asked the Mossad to give an assessment about King Hussein's position. And the Mossad wrote probably the most flowery report they ever wrote. They wrote to the Prime Minister that Hussein is a man that's quote unquote. Hussein is a man trapped on the bridge, burning from both sides. He can't go forward and he can't go backward. And he can't jump. There is a crocodile in the river beneath. The one who ignited the fire was Israel, and the crocodile beneath was Israel. And Hussein was a trap on that bridge. He can't go back to the Arab, and he can't move forward and sign a peace agreement with Israel. That whole thing lasted until 1994, when finally Hussein signed a peace agreement with Israel. And even in 94, when they signed the peace agreement, Jordan was supposed to give back two small pieces of land. One is in the desert of Arafat, and the other one is in the Jordan Valley. Even then, the Israeli insisted that they will lease these two pieces of land for 25 years. And that lease expired last year, and it was a big mess. If anyone was following, it was a big mess to convince Israel to finish the lease. And until now, all Jordanian convinced that Israel will one day will take them back. I'm sorry if I sound a bit scattered, because I'm trying to pick and choose from my own research. At the end of the day, the whole peace process started on a simple formula: land for peace. Israel supposed to give back the land they're occupied, and the Arabs supposed to sign peace agreement. From our experience, the Palestinian, no one get the land and no one get the peace. The settlement is eating up the land that was supposed to be exchanged for peace. And now we all know, it's a news. Yeah. We all know Trump plan and what happened and what they want to do. There is really no room for the Palestinian state, and there is no room for Palestinians themselves. The overwhelming majority of Palestinians completely convinced that the final plan of Israel is to transfer us out of here. And the fight now is how to stop that transfer. No one is talking about state. No one is talking about peace agreement. Everybody is worried about how to make the transfer impossible for Israel. I think I will stop here and give you guys a chance to ask a question. And maybe during the question session, we could cover a lot of ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for covering so much information in such a short time, and for giving us many spaces to kind of jump into the conversation. Because there are not questions at the moment in the chat, I will begin with my own. I wonder if you could say a bit more about the years between 67 and 77 on the Israeli settlement, seeing as settlement in the West Bank, in the occupied West Bank, did not start from the right-wing Israeli government rather than the left-wing. If you would say something about that, and then I see we're getting questions in, so that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm. I think you need to look at how Israel used to see things. During the labor, in the beginning of 60s, Israel looked at the settlements as a security. They want to make, like, they call it the belt. They want to make a belt of settlements around the West Bank to protect themselves from the Palestinian by settlements. And that thinking kept going until 77. In 77, when Begin became the prime minister, the whole ideology, the thinking changed. And Begin started thinking, this is Judea and Samaria, this is our land, and we will settle it all. And that thinking, that ideology, it's what's now the discourse in Israeli politics right now. This is the school of thought of Vladimir Jabotinsky, if anyone familiar with the Jabotinsky, that we going for the whole thing, the Iron Wall.
Thank you. So there are comments saying, thank you, that was fascinating and incredibly interesting. Thank you so much. When we'll be able to see your film? I guess you can tell us that at the end. What do you think happened between 1967 and 1993 that brought the peace to be signed?
I first object to the word peace. I'm one of the people who were dancing in the street for Oslo. I was really naive. I thought, the conflict is over and finally we're gonna find a way to live in peace. But it wasn't really peace agreement. The Oslo agreement is hundreds of pages. You will not find one single time there is a mention in the whole agreement of a Palestinian state. The whole thing for Israel was, at most, the Palestinian, we will get autonomy, a limited autonomy, as Begin used to call it. If you're asking me how the Palestinian got to that position, because I think the Palestinian finally, they start running out of option. The PLO was kicked out of Beirut and ended up being in Tunis. And Arafat and the PLO, they were 4,000 miles away from the homeland. So Arafat found himself in a position where he doesn't really have a lot of option. He had to make a move. And here comes the Oslo, but it wasn't really an agreement that will set the tone for peace. And the implementation was also another story. We all know how it happened. Israel refused to basically implement their side of the agreement. So I wouldn't really call Oslo as a peace agreement. It is not even, it officially doesn't even call a peace agreement.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Can you please tell us about Hussein in 1973 and why he didn't join the war then?
What his name? The former president of Israel. He just passed away. He was a pilot. I forgot his name. Anyhow, he said Hussein made two mistakes. Hussein made a mistake when he joined in 67, and his other mistake when he decided not to join in 73, because the Arab were in a very good position at that time to score a victory over Israel. I think that's my own conclusion from my own research. I think his main thing was Hussein reached a conclusion, unshaken conclusion, that the end game for this conflict, it will be through negotiation, not through military and wars. And he doesn't want to be part of it at all. And I'm not sure if you guys know, Hussein met with Nasser, and Nasser didn't tell him that we're going to launch the war. Sorry, with Sadat. And Sadat didn't tell him that we're going to launch the war, but it was obvious that there is a war coming up. And when Hussein came home, he flew in his own helicopter to Tel Aviv, met with Golda Meir, she was the prime minister, and he told her, there is a war coming. This is not secret now. I'm sure some of you already know this information. Hussein, the one who warned Israel in 73 that there is a war coming up. But Golda Meir didn't even take him seriously.
Wasn't Hussein actually always the enemy of the Palestinians? Example, Black September.
I don't know. I don't know if he is. Yes.
Fun fact, I think this might be some sort of Israeli common knowledge. I didn't ask this question, but it's familiar to me as well. So
I'm not sure if he's the enemy of the Palestinian. I mean, King Hussein has a country to run. And sometimes his interests and the interests of his country did not, align with the interests of the Palestinian. I think early on, before 67, King Hussein and the Zionist movement shared the same goal, to suppress Palestinian nationalism. It was in the interest of both of them. But I think quickly he learned that this is not going to happen, especially after the formation of the PLO. I won't characterize him as an enemy of the Palestinian, but definitely he was not a great friend of the Palestinian. But right now, if you look at what's happening now, I can reverse my statement and say he's probably was the most honest Arab leader with the Palestinian.
thank you very much. Do you think Gulf countries such as Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates could play a positive role in blocking the plan of transfer of Palestinians outside of the West Bank?
The short answer, no. I actually have more trust in the Zionists than the Gulf states. This is phony governments. They have no democracy. They have no rule of law. They stinkly rich, and they're wasting their money in a stupid game of war with Iran. Iran is a country of 5,000 years of history, and it's part of the region before the Arabs and the Jews exist in this area. You're not gonna wipe out Iran. You're not gonna push Iran out of there. And for sure, they will not get anything from Netanyahu. When they signed the agreement, the UAE, their selling point to the Palestinian that we managed to stop the annexation of the West Bank. It took Netanyahu less than 2 hours to get on TV and said, no, we didn't stop the annexation. The annexation is still going. Yeah. I think these regimes, they're looking for security. And the American, if you guys notice their foreign policy lately, the American, they really thinking seriously of leaving the region, and they doing it. And we saw their position in Syria. They live in Iraq now. So they want to hand over the security of the Gulf to Israel. And I think that's the only game it's happening between Israel and the American and the Gulf state. A Palestinian really have nothing to do with what's happening now.
How do you perceive the Iranian regime's position towards the Palestinian cause? And I will add onto that question asking, who do you perceive as positive allies of Palestinians worldwide, locally and also internationally?
I don't believe the Iranian. I don't think they with the Palestinian. I think they serve in their own interests. And if you really look in the ground, what did Iran do to us to help us? Nothing. They give weapons to Hamas. And it's really silly weapons. They will never be able to hurt Israel with their weapons. Iran's main goal is to stay a major player in the region. There is a 3 political alliance in the region: Israel and now Arab Sunni states, Iran, and it's a proxy, group, and the and the Turk. So I don't think they're doing anything. It's for the Palestinian. Everything they're doing is for their own interests. There is a Kurdish say. It said there is no friend to the Kurd except the mountain. One time, I asked my student, I said, if we take the Kurd out and put the Palestinian, how would this sound? There is no friend to the Palestinian except. And I like the answer of one of the girls. She looked at me and she said, there is no friend to the Palestinian, period. And we feel it now. We feel it now. The Algerian with us, because, the history of fighting colonialism. The Tunisian, they given us lip service. The Egyptian sold us out. So it's basically, in my opinion, there's really nothing left to the Palestinian except himself. And this is really the mood in the West Bank now. It's stay your ground, educate the kids. You have no friends. Sure, we have people all over the world support us, but I'm talking about governments. But I think if tomorrow you were asked worldwide, are you on the side of Israel or the Palestinian? I am very sure the majority will be on the side of the Palestinian. But unfortunately, it's not the people who decide foreign policy.
How do you find efforts such as the unlearning Zionism from your personal daily life perspective?
Oh boy. I actually think, guys, your title, Unlearning Zionism, it's a very daring. And it's very strong tools to fight the Zionists. I'm not sure if we can unlearn Zionism. I'm talking from a Palestinian point of view. You guys have different point of view. I think you might do much better service if you really try to educate the Jewish public of what really Zionism is all about, and not to buy the biblical emotional story coming back to the land. The majority of the leader of the Zionist movement, they were atheists and socialists. They don't believe in God. But as they used to say, they believe that God gave them the land, although they don't believe in God. So to be honest with you, I don't feel like I have opinion in that one.
Next question. We'll try to take as many as we can. If I may add as well that Iran and Assad destroyed the Palestinian refugee camp district in Damascus, Yarmouk camp, sieged it in 2014 till 150 Palestinians died out of hunger. I guess that's not so much of a question, but rather adding to what you said. Would you like to refer to that? Or should I continue?
No, I think you should continue.
Question. Could we ever expect Palestinian Authority, a product of Oslo Accord, welcome a democratic change in its aging and ineffective leadership to accommodate more voices of the Palestinian society? Follow-up. And will it be fair to say that the PA, along with the other Arab regimes, have betrayed the Palestinian aspirations and have left a serious dent to the movement? I'm sorry, we're like asking you, but I mean, you know.
I live in Ramallah. I don't want to go to jail. I know. I agree. I agree with you. I mean, the PA completely failed the Palestinian. The Palestinian leadership completely failed the Palestinian. But also, to be fair, I mean, imagine if tomorrow we throw them away and we bring Mother Teresa from her grave, and her prime minister will be Nelson Mandela. Do you think they can accomplish anything different? I doubt it. We're dealing with Israel, and Israel is exception state in every sense of the word. It's just exception. There is no country on earth where there is more United Nations resolution against it than Israel. And what the United Nations implement out of this resolution? Zero. Zero implementation of all the UN resolution. And I could go until tomorrow morning telling you how much Israel is exception in every sense of the word. So yes, the Palestinian leadership corrupt, and it looked like a chicken head in the head, but I don't think they're the main obstacle. I think the main obstacle that's just Israel doesn't have a plan for peace. They have a plan for a transfer.
How do you think the current King of Jordan and contemporary Jordanians will react to your film?
I don't know. We'll find out.
And maybe say something about who are Jordanians, who identifies as a Jordanian. I don't know if you want to say something on that, but I feel like that's
no,
probably...
actually, I think the current Jordanian regime, I think they open-minded. They know about the film. They know what I'm doing. They don't know all the bits and pieces, yeah, but they know what I am doing. I sent them the synopsis for the film. They have a lot of questions. They get back to me with many questions, and we still talking. But I don't know how they will react when finally the final products come out. But I think more and more, King Hussein look great compared to what's happening now. King Hussein basically breached agreement with Israel. The only thing was missing is Jerusalem. They agreed to give him most of the West Bank, but not Jerusalem. And no Palestinian state. It should be a confederation part of Jordan. So I think they will be okay. I'm sure there is some stuff in it will be uncomfortable to them, because as one of the Jordanian officials told me, I was telling him that, this is history, so it's not now. And he said, this is the Middle East. And in the Middle East, there is no such a thing as history. If things happened 3,000 years ago, we're still fighting about it today.
Sorry to ask you one more question. How could one avoid the provocative use of anti-Semitic accusations against voices critical to the occupation of Palestine by Zionist forces?
You can't. Just accept it and deal with it. You can't because this is a very, very powerful tool in their hand. I wish they will stop using it, because anti-Semitism exists, and it should be, we should fight it. But if you keep using and throw that accusation at people, it will come a time when no one will take you seriously, because your accusation is baseless, completely baseless. If people want to get together and Zoom and talk about the Israeli occupation, why are they anti-Semitism? Why are they anti-Semite? It's just completely nonsense. Actually, there is more voices inside Israel critical of the Israeli government than anywhere in the Arab world. So what should we call them? Oh yeah, they have a new term for them, a self-hating Jew. So it's basically, if you're not with the establishment of the Zionists, you're an enemy. They have no room for dissent. So I don't think, it's short, I don't think you can avoid it. Just accept it and deal with it.
Thank you. Doing our best. There is space for more, maybe one or two more questions. I don't see any in the chat, so I'll ask one of mine. Would you say that the Palestinian struggle, I feel like the framing of it used to be more a national struggle. I wonder if that's true, and if it, or if it was always an anti-colonial struggle.
I'm sorry, can you repeat it again?
So would you say that the Palestinian struggle, in its many phases, but in a very general sense, is the Palestinian struggle a national one or an anti-colonial one? And what does that mean, if it is a national one, or if it's an anti-colonial one, on being part of it or joining it?
I think the beginning of the Palestinian movement, I think was clear and simple for the Palestinian. It's a national movement fighting for its land. But more and more, with the introduction of the settlements, the thinking start changing. And this question, by the way, is debated every day in Palestinian universities. Are we a national movement, or are we a movement fighting colonialism? For me, I think it's both. I think we are a national movement trying to find a place on this earth like any other nation. But at the same time, you cannot ignore this colonization project in your face 24 hours. And from every Palestinian city, every Palestinian town, if you look left or right, you could see one of the settlements. So what should I call this? It is colonialism.
No more questions in the chat. Lucky for us, I'm a curious person and I have many of my own. Can you take one or two more questions, Mohammed? How are you
Yalla,
doing?
last one.
Last one. Okay.
I'm editing and my editor is waiting for me.
Okay. Last one. When will we be able to see your film? I guess you answered so many questions. Thank you for your generosity. When will we be able to see your film, and what's next for you?
I think it will be a year from now. And right now, today I met with the BBC over Zoom, and we're talking to the BBC, and we might have it like a 3-part series and BBC. But the talk is still in the beginning. I don't know where it will go. But my best guess, a year from now, the film will be out.
Okay, well, we look forward to watching it, and I speak now in the name of everyone who was here with us tonight and watched live on Facebook and will watch this in the future. Thank you so much for sharing your resources and your time with us and your knowledge with us and your insights. on so many different personal and political levels. Could you maybe recommend a book that depicts life of Palestinians in the West Bank is a question. I'm sure there are other people also who maybe have ideas. I'll leave the chat open for a few moments so that people can write in there. And on the very top of the chat is a link also for to our website, to our Facebook page, where you find all the different events happening in this month of our October program. And please feel free to join us tomorrow for the Marxist revolutionary perspectives of the economy of the occupation and their limits with Dr. Shir Hever. Thank you, Mohammed. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank all of you. And I want to say something to you. I'm aware of all that mess you guys going through in Berlin. Don't give up. Keep the fight. And your effort is not in vain. There's many, many Palestinians who appreciate what you're doing. And trust me, you humanizing the face of the enemy. Keep it going. Keep it up. Many people with you. And at the end, we will win. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank everyone who is supporting us. And I will say we are lucky and honored to be part of the same struggle. Take care, everyone. Good night. Thank you.
Keep up the trouble.
We're doing our best.